Text Expander from Smile is supporting this edition of MacVoices. Text Expander can help you be more productive in every single application on your Mac. Find out how at textexpander.com. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, the time is almost here. We're headed into the fall, and that means new OSs, new releases from Apple of all kinds, hardware and software. And the Take Control folks have been busy trying to get us ready to be up to speed for some of these. This time, we're going to talk to Mr. Josh Centers. He's the author of the new Take Control of iOS 13 and iPadOS 13. Josh, welcome, and thanks for your efforts for all of us.
Well, thanks for having me back on, Chuck.
Yeah, this is interesting. A lot of things here to talk about because this will be the first release since iOS forked really fully into iOS 13 for iPhones and iPadOS 13 for iPads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and well, the good news for the folks who buy the books is that there's not enough difference between the two operating systems at this point that just to really justify splitting it into two separate books. So you get two operating systems in one. The big differences between the two, it comes down to the windowing system. iPadOS offers a lot of improvements to the windowing system over iOS 12, and of course, those features aren't available on the smaller screen devices like the iPhone. The other big difference is the presentation of the home screen in iPadOS. In iPadOS, you can display the icons a lot closer together, so it looks more like a traditional desktop operating system, and it's looks a little less like a toy. You can also put your Today View widgets on the home screen, so they're side by side with your app icons, which is really handy, especially if you use Shortcuts, because of course Shortcuts has its own widget, and so now you can access those shortcuts directly from the home screen without having to do any extra swiping or anything. But right now, that's really the two big differences between the operating systems. Of course, there are some differences that are already there. For instance, there's a picture-in-picture mode on the iPad that don't have that in iPhone. And of course, at least for now, we'll see what comes here in the next few weeks. But Apple Pencil only works on the iPad and not on the iPhone.
We should have start out by saying that we're recording this a little bit before the book is released and before iOS 13 and iPadOS 13 are released. So,
the book's out now.
Oh, the book's out now. Okay, yeah, the book's out now. Okay. Well, and that's kind of the point here, though, that you've been working off of betas and pre-releases and everything to try to get us up to speed with this stuff. I have not been running any betas. I just don't run betas anymore. Yeah, exactly. So now the book is out there if you want to start getting a little bit ahead. And usually we talk about this at the end, but we'll talk about it at the beginning because once it is out, if there are any changes, you all will be doing revisions to get things right.
Yeah, it looks like we're already have one coming up because Apple removed a few features during the beta cycle. And now they've already issued, before iOS 13 is even out, they've issued betas for iOS 13.1 and iPadOS 13.1, which brings some of those features back. One of those I'm really excited about, and that's personal shortcuts. So you know how in HomeKit, in the Home app, you have these, I'm sorry, I said personal shortcuts. I meant to say personal automations, which is something Android has had forever. So, just like you have automations for your home in the Home app, or let's say you can turn on the lights when you come home, or, you can turn the fan off when you go to bed, stuff like that. It's going to be like that except for your device. So some really neat things you can do with this. For instance, one Federico Viticci came up with that I found really handy is to play your Apple Music My Chill mix when you open Twitter. So you just kind of calm yourself down and then just even things out. But there's lots of neat little things like, when you reach a certain place, you turn the volume down on your phone, or when you turn on the low power mode, you can just turn down the display brightness, stuff like that. Lots of really neat little automations you can do. That's going to be coming hopefully in iOS 13.1. and I'm super excited to add that to the book. And of course, if you own the book, the iOS, iPadOS, floor wax book, it will you'll have a free update for that.
Okay, so just to be clear, that this is not a situation where you're going to get a book that's half done, or that it is going to be out of date as soon as the actual release version comes. I want to go back to the home screen for a second on iPadOS 13, because you say that the icons can be put a little closer together. Are they being? Is the screen? Is the icon size changing, or is it just pushing them closer together?
Yeah, it's just less margin to put things in web developer terms. It's less margin between the icons, so you can fit more on the screen. It doesn't bunch them up at all. It's still perfectly usable with your fingers. There is an option that they added during the beta cycle where you can revert to the old spacing. I think it's like 9 by 9, something like that was the old spacing. I don't like to get into specifics because now, like with different sized iPads, it's going to be a little different every device. But yeah, you can, if you want the old spacing, you can. The default is to put them much closer together, which I think looks better and maybe a little bit more useful. It's more aesthetic than anything, but it does keep you from the swipe to another page for certain apps, and it just makes a lot more sense. The iPad always looked kind of goofy having like so much space between the icons. And I know they improved that a bit a few versions back, but now they've improved it even more. And if you see, I've seen some pictures where people will connect their iPad to a monitor, which is something you can do with the newer iPads Pro with USB-C. You can connect it to a compatible monitor, and it actually looks like a real desktop operating system when used that way.
Yeah, I that's something I will definitely be looking forward to, because the more icons, the better. I mean, I realize that you can take that to an extreme, but I find myself, you're right, having to swipe, which is not, that's a first world problem. I have to swipe to the second or third screen, big deal. But still, nothing beats just having it right there and accessible.
Yeah, really improves the aesthetics.
Yeah. So if those are the main things for iPadOS 13, then it's probably not going to create a lot of heartburn to do that particular upgrade.
No, I mean, not of course, notwithstanding any bugs or anything like that. Although I haven't seen anything too bad. Although I've heard a lot of bad things about the built-in mail app, which I don't personally use. I use Gmail. But yeah, and I actually talked to somebody with some inside connections at Apple, and I was told that really one of the goals, one of the challenges the iPad team has internally is they want to make the iPad more useful for power users, but they also don't want to alienate the people who have grown to love the simplicity of the iPad. And so this is one way they're approaching that. So it's why things like I know a lot of people use an iPad and never realize they can do split screen. They never realize they can do now I can't remember all the terms they use for slide over. Slide over. We have a little window on top of the main window. A lot of people don't. My mom loves her iPad. She never doesn't realize that stuff is there, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's bad in that it's this stuff isn't so discoverable, but it's good in that you can use that simple interface and never end up getting confused by this stuff.
Yeah, and so even now I will find certain little features in iOS that, and I feel like I'm pretty well versed in iOS. That, where did that come from? Or I forgot about that feature, and that's it's almost like finding a little Easter egg that really helps you be a little more productive. But it doesn't sound like iPadOS 13 at this point is that big a change.
And another big change though. Well, of course, like one thing I mentioned, slide over. You can now have multiple slide over windows, which is very convenient, and they work a lot like how you switch windows on the iPhone 10. Like you swipe it from the bottom, and they'll splay out like a stack of cards, and that makes things a little more useful. probably the bit, and one thing, very important thing I forgot to mention about the differences between iOS and iPadOS now is that iPadOS now includes a desktop class, put that in quotes, but version of Safari. And what I mean by desktop class, unfortunately, it doesn't really do extensions like traditional, although, there's content blockers have been around forever. But what it does do is it can display websites that typically have not worked on the iPad. Some examples that Apple gives are Google Drive, which you was just blocked. Is just blocked if you try to access it on an iPhone. Squarespace is another one. But yeah, there are a lot of full-featured web apps that will now work in Safari under iPadOS, which for a lot of people, including yours truly, makes the iPad actually usable for a lot of workflows. If a lot of writers depend on Google Docs because it's probably everyone seems to agree it's the best collaborative writing system, and so now all the features of that are open to you without having to use the app for iPad for Google Docs is pretty terrible. So now you can use the full web interface, and it mostly works how you expect. If you have a Squarespace website, you can use that editor fully. Lots of little things like that, and it makes the iPad as a whole a lot more useful than in the past.
So, is there a difference? There's a difference. Excuse me. Is there a way to shift between the classic Safari, iOS Safari version and the desktop version of this? Or is it just, okay, it's going to work with whatever the best option is for that particular website?
That's a good question. I would assume if you have the option, if the website gives you the option to use the mobile version of a website, you could do that. The other, I can't remember off the top of my head, and I think it's different in the betas. I can't remember if you can change your user agent in Safari, because I know one of the tricks that Apple uses is that it changes the user agent to present Safari and iPadOS as being Safari on the Mac. And so that way, a lot of these websites have checkers, like I guess some kind of JavaScript in place to serve a dumbed down version of the site if you go on an iPad. So Apple makes Safari on the iPad look like Safari on the Mac, so you get the full experience. So that, and if even if Safari doesn't offer that, I know of third-party web browsers, and of course they all use that inner web. I can't remember, web UI view. I can't remember exactly what you call it, but anyway, it basically uses the Safari engine, and so you'd be able to do it that way. But overall, I haven't had a lot of problems with it, or at least nothing that would make me run screaming back to the dumbed down iOS version of a website. For instance, if you go to Google Drive, I can't remember, or maybe it's Google Docs, one or the other, or maybe both. If you go to those right now, if you're on an iPad on iOS 12, it will just give you a message that tells you to go download the app. Well, now in iOS 13, or I'm sorry, iPadOS 13, it will load the actual web app. Unless, now here's the thing, if you have the Google Docs app installed, it will open the Google Docs app instead. So if you want to use that full web version, you'll want to uninstall that app. Assuming, of course, Google doesn't find some way to break this before it's released, which kind of wouldn't surprise me knowing all the bad blood between Apple and Google. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Smile and TextExpander are sponsoring this edition of MacVoices. Do you want to do something quick and easy to improve your productivity? Want something that is bulletproof that will improve the quality of your work? Are you looking for a utility that can integrate with just about any program on your Mac to make it better? If so, you're looking for TextExpander from Smile. TextExpander works pretty much everywhere on the Mac inside just about any program. Desktop publishing, email, web publishing, browsers, task management applications, chat applications, the list goes on and on. Because all of those require text entry, and TextExpander helps you enter text quickly and accurately. Have a word, phrase, paragraph, or page that you need inserted regularly? TextExpander does it with a few keystrokes. Have a word that you misspell frequently? TextExpander can help you fix that so that it never happens again. Want to standardize wording to customer inquiries across your entire team? TextExpander is the answer. With almost no learning curve and massive payback on the time invested, you should be using TextExpander. Visit TextExpander.com right now, download a free trial, and find out what so many of the productivity experts already know. TextExpander from Smile, the makers of world-class software. Thanks to Smile for being the longest-running sponsor of MacVoices. So it sounds like the meat of this book is going to be iOS 13 for the iPhone. And judging by the articles I've seen on the web, there are quite a few changes, enhancements, additions to iOS 13.
Mm-hmm.
What are your favorites?
Oh, wow. I don't even know where to start. I think probably my favorite thing, oddly enough, is an accessibility feature, something called voice control. And it's pretty amazing. So you turn this on in accessibility settings, and you can control your entire device with just your voice. You don't have to touch a home button. You don't have to do a Siri command or anything. It just responds to your voice. And of course, you can do things like you can say open an app or this and that. Two tips I'll offer for that. You can say show names, and it will show you the name of every on-screen element. And then you can interact with them that way. Like you can say tap, tap that, pinch that. You can say stuff like that. It's pretty intuitive, and there's lots of commands built in. The other way, and this is my personal favorite, and you'll understand why in a second, but you can say show grid, and it will display a grid overlay. And then you can access anything on the screen by just narrowing down the grid. So let's say you have a grid pop up. It says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can say 7, and it will zoom in on that, and then it'll show another grid. And then you can say like 4, and it'll zoom in on that element. And then you can say tap, and then a number, and it'll tap that part of the grid. Well, and the first time I used this, it reminded me of the movie Blade Runner. And, he had that machine where he stuck the photograph in, and he would say coordinates and zoom in on different parts of the screen. There was like a grid on the screen. I'm pretty sure that's where Apple got the idea for this voice control grid system. And so I actually even made a little YouTube video that reenacted that, where I had like a still photo from the movie Blade Runner, used it and zoomed in on, and you can pan around, you can zoom in, pan around, all that stuff. It's pretty awesome. So that's my personal favorite feature, just because it's so powerful, and for everyone. I mean, but especially if you're like a paraplegic, or you have some kind of vision issues, or all sorts of different ailments, that can that will probably totally change the way you use your iPhone and iPad. And you can even use it to type. It's just pretty amazing all the way around, and it works remarkably well.
So I don't have to preface anything with, hey, S lady. I can just say launch application X and type, welcome Josh Centers to MacVoices, and it'll do it.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's basically that simple. Now, of course, it can be kind of annoying. One night I had it turned on. My wife and I were watching a movie on the iPad, and, somebody on the screen would say something, and it would activate voice control. So, that is the one drawback, but overall it works incredibly well.
Can you turn voice control on and off with your voice?
That's a good question. I used the accessibility shortcut, which is on my iPad. It's triple click home button. I forget what it is on the devices without a home button, but yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can turn it on and off. Another feature I love is that all the photo editing features that you've had in iOS now apply to video. And I'll tell you what's really great about this. And I've had this problem so many times. Let's say you start taking a video, and you're holding the phone in like portrait mode, and they're like, oh crap, I don't want to take this in portrait mode. It'll look stupid. So you turn it this way. but it's already started the video as portrait mode, and so that's how it's going to record. So your video is going to be sideways, right? And the way you had to fix this before is you had to import the video into iMovie on the desktop, and then you could rotate the video. And it was a big, long conversion process. Well, in iOS 13, you can just rotate the video, and it just works. You can even crop your video. Like every editing function that you have for photos, you also have for videos. And they've redesigned that interface and made it a little more accessible. So that's a really cool thing I like. A big one I like, and this is one me and Adam Inks, my publisher at Tidbits, debate all the time because he hates it. But dark mode, I love dark mode. It's great. Well, see, my eyes are very sensitive to light, so anytime I can dim, and iPad, Apple screens are insanely bright, so anytime I can make that just a little bit dimmer, I embrace the opportunity. And of course, dark mode is also great if you're using a device in a dark room at night. You're reading the news or your Twitter or whatever. And now we're going to have to see what kind of third-party support this gets, because developers have to build that in. Though I have a feeling that's going to be a pretty popular feature, at least in all the mainstream apps. And so you turn on dark mode, and it turns basically everything on your screen dark. And instead of all the white bits, it's black. And so it puts out a lot less light. So if you're in a dark room, you're not going to light up the entire room just by reading a web page.
We've had a lot of discussions about dark mode here on MacVoices, and I can't get that excited over it. I mean, it looks nice. I tend to be more of a traditionalist, really for no good reason. But if you told me, okay, I had to use dark mode all the time, it wouldn't be a tragedy. But some people get really excited over it and absolutely love it. With your situation, yeah, that makes perfect sense. That if it's literally easier on the eyes, then it has to make you more productive and certainly make it a better experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I consider it something of an accessibility feature. There's all these scientific studies that will tell you that dark mode makes you slower and dumber and all this stuff. But the reality is, if your eyes hurt staring at a bright white screen, and of course you can improve that with night shift. But it only does so much. But if your eyes hurt while looking at the screen and you can make them not hurt, I think you're going to be a lot better off. And if you don't like it, you never have to turn it on. It's great to have the option there. Another thing I'm really excited about, especially since Dropbox has totally been dropping the box lately, is iCloud Drive now allows for folder sharing. So previously, Apple finally made it so you could share a file in such a way that two people could collaborate on it. I mean, they used to have file sharing, but it'd be like, just send this person a file, which is just kind of dumb. So they had that collaborative sharing that was introduced in, I think, iOS 11. And now you can share an entire folder, which is one of the big things that was keeping me on Dropbox. For instance, when we edit take control documents, the way we've always been doing it, at least since I've been around, is we have a shared Dropbox folder, and we check the manuscript in and out of that, and that's how we collaborate. We probably should use something like Git, but anyway, I don't think Joe wants to mess with that. But so that's going to be nice to be able to use all that iCloud space that I pay for, because I have like 300 something gigabytes of photos, and so then my wife has some stuff, so I basically have to buy the 2 terabyte tier of iCloud, but that's basically all the space I've used. I've used like just that relatively tiny sliver of the 2 terabytes I have. So it'll be nice to take advantage of more of that space that I'm basically forced to pay $10 a month for. And also, I don't have to use Dropbox anymore because it's gotten insanely bad. Going to see. Oh, and a couple of things that I know people are excited for, and these are aimed at iPadOS, but they work on the iPhone too, is you can now use external storage devices, like thumb drives in particular, and that's really easy if you have one of the newer iPads Pro that has USB-C. You can get a USB-C thumb drive and plug it right in, and it just works. If you have a device with a lightning port, I thought I had the adapter here, but maybe not. So I will give a little piece of advice. Apple sells this Lightning to USB adapter. This is not the one you want because this sucks. It's $30. They sell. I don't know where the heck I think it's in my travel bag. They sell one that's a little bigger. It's $10 more, and it's totally worth the extra $10. It's the USB 3 to Lightning. I think they still call it a camera kit. But anyway, first of all, it has USB 3 speed instead of just USB 2. The other thing it offers is a Lightning port pass through, so you can charge your device while you have something plugged in, and that's especially important if you want to use an external USB drive, because the Lightning port by itself will not power a thumb drive. So you either have to have a powered USB hub or one of the USB 3 adapters with a Lightning connector plugged in. And that's a lot more convenient than trying to use a powered USB hub with your iPad or iPhone. So just a little tip for you there. But anyway, so you can access the external storage from the Files app. You can also connect to SMB servers from the Files app. So you can have a file share on, say, your Mac and share that with your iPhones and iPads, which is pretty awesome. And another thing they've added, and this is a bit of a shock to people, but there actually is mouse support in iOS and iPadOS 13, and you can either use a USB mouse or a Bluetooth mouse. You can use a trackpad too. I'm just saying mouse as a generic term for a pointing device. It's actually an accessibility feature. I explain in the book how to turn this on and how to tweak it. It's a little funky. You're not going to see your typical little pointer with the arrow. It's a circle with a dot in the middle, and it's a little bit like, for instance, the right click brings up the assistive touch menu that has like the home button and different shortcuts and things. It's not the typical contextual menu you're used to. Which reminds me of another thing I really like about iOS and iPadOS 13. So something that's been an exclusive feature of newer iPhones for a while is that 3D touch. You 3D touch on something, you get a little contextual menu. Well, one of my favorite things about iOS and iPadOS 13 is that's no longer exclusive to 3D touch. Now you can long press, or you can touch and hold, or whatever term you like to use, on an app, and it will bring up that contextual menu. So you can use that on an iPad now, which never made sense why they restricted that in the first place. But long story short, you don't have to use 3D touch to access those extra power user features now, which is pretty awesome. So that's just a few things that make iOS and iPadOS 13 a lot more powerful.
I can't let the mouse trackpad thing go, Josh.
Okay.
Is this something that you think is outside of the accessibility realm? And certainly there are folks who that's going to be a great boon for. But for the rest of us, or for those who are still just insistent on trying to say, I'm replacing my MacBook Pro or my MacBook Air with my iPad, is this going to make a difference?
I think it makes a difference if you want to use your iPad as a desktop. I mentioned earlier people connecting their iPads to external monitors. Well, when you do that, you have it set up on your desk. It's a real pain to have to reach out and touch the screen. So now you can connect a USB or Bluetooth keyboard, which you've been able to do for a while, and then you can also connect a mouse, and so you're not having to constantly reach over to your iPad. So I think in that context, if you really insist on using an iPad that way, I think that's a little weird, but there's a lot of people that like to do that, and it's a lot more usable now. I'm not sure how useful it will be in the real world. I'm presuming Apple is going to strongly discourage developers from building apps with mouse support in mind. Like making icons small, so you have to manipulate with a mouse. But we'll have to see. There's always these things in iOS betas that we don't really know how it's going to look until people get their hands on it, right? And people really start playing with it. It may not lead to anything, and it might end up really changing how a lot of people use their iPads. It's going to be interesting to see over the next year how that develops. But for right now, if that's something you really been wanting to do, that's all the more reason to be excited for these new operating systems.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be a naysayer, but it just an iPad's an iPad, a MacBook Pro or Mac Pro or a laptop is a laptop, and the operating systems were built with those particular capabilities and interfaces and the way that you interact with them in mind. And so there's certainly nothing wrong with including something like that. But you're right. If they start designing to the detriment of the basic use of the device, that's going to be a problem. And I hope it doesn't happen, because I feel like over on the other platform, yeah, it works just fine, but I think there have been some compromises to try to have both of those interfaces. And it just never, it feels a bit schizophrenic to me, but that's just me.
Yeah. Well, you have to consider too, though, that we've had the Apple Pencil for a few years, and that hasn't drastically changed how apps are designed. So I think it's pretty similar to that. I mean, you could probably use an Apple Pencil in a very similar way to a mouse, at least in terms of having that kind of small pointer on screen. Small manipulator, I guess, would be a term you could use for it. So I'm not too worried about that. But it might open up some interesting possibilities. I am curious to see if developers would be able to use the mouse in games, because having that PC game kind of control setup would be interesting on an iPad. But I'm not going to hold my breath for that. Speaking of game controls, I don't think there's a lot of gamers in your audience, but I do think this is cool. So all of the new operating systems, and that includes iOS 13, iPadOS 13, tvOS 13, and even Catalina. I don't think this applies to watchOS 6, but you can connect out of the box a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox One controller to your device. You can pair it just like any other Bluetooth device, and you can use it with games that support MFI game controllers. And so that's a great feature. That's especially going to be great, if you subscribe to the upcoming Apple Arcade service. But it's, just a nice little feature to have, especially if you're a gamer and you already have one of those game controllers laying around. As I'll just tell you, I've tried some of the different iOS and Apple TV game controllers, and compared to what the big game companies put out, they're terrible, especially for the price. For different reasons, but just no one can make a better game controller than Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo. So you got 2 out of 3 of those now.
Justice, we could go on and on, because there's obviously a lot here, but I want to wrap up by asking this question. Built-in apps, Apple supplied apps, anything in iOS 13 on either one, the iPadOS or iOS 13 for the iPhone, that really jump out at you and say, oh my God, this is great, or that it's like, oh boy, this is something to avoid until they fix it?
Well, I've heard a lot about a lot of problems with the built-in mail app. I don't know if that'll get fixed by release time. So if you're dependent on that, you might want to hold off on that update. There's a lot of neat stuff coming to the Maps app. Apple's greatly improving the built-in map data. And they finally have an answer to Google Street View called Look Around. The bad news is right now it's only available in Honolulu, Vegas, and San Francisco. But where it does work, it's really neat. It's a lot smoother than Google Street View. One thing I'm really excited about is all the new stuff in the Reminders app, which does require a format change that breaks compatibility with previous operating systems. So breaks sync with iOS 12 and Mojave and all that, but it adds a lot more capabilities. Like, for instance, you can do what they call smart lists, where it automatically tags people in to-do items. It can automatically pick up dates and things like that. You can also do nested reminders. So it really turns reminders into like a full-fledged GTD style to-do app. So that's a pretty exciting thing because, Reminders has been kind of a toy app for so long. The Shortcuts app is now built in, and there's a lot of really cool stuff coming to that. I'm hoping to cover more in depth in the future. That's been in flux during the betas. But one thing I will say it can do, at least in the beta, is if you have the Apple TV Remote app installed, you can use a shortcut and launch certain apps from the Apple TV. So you can set up a menu, you press this button, it launches this app in your Apple TV. So there's a lot of cool stuff the power users will be able to play with there. Overall, you're going to find iOS and iPadOS 13 add a lot more power user stuff. Performance seems to be on par with iOS 12, if not better. And despite the mail issue, which I don't use mail anyway, I think it's going to be a very solid update for everyone involved, and you can get a lot more use out of your devices.
I have this funny feeling we'll be hearing more about the mail issue from Joe, because I know he has a bit of a burr under his saddle about mail everywhere. So,
Joe Smash.
Yeah. So we have this book. It's out now. What kind of pricing do we have, and how are upgrades being handled?
Let's see. If you buy the book new, it's $14.99. There's also a bundle where you can buy the iOS 13 book alongside Take Control of Catalina and Take Control of Upgrading to Catalina, and you save 40%. So you pay $25.80 for all three books, which I think that's a great deal. And I think if you own the iOS 12 book, I think the upgrade price is half of the new price, so like around $750 for that. So, pretty reasonable all in all. And hey, like I said, you get two operating systems for the price of one.
And with some of these changes, I mean, this is what you want to do. You want to get somebody that's spent the time to dig through it and guide you through it, and will keep you updated as the official version actually hits the streets. That's no small consideration here. But this is a good way to get a jump on it and start thinking about it. But I personally I would tell you to shy away from betas. Wait for the main release. But that's me.
If you're chicken.
Yeah, well, or if you just have too much to do and you don't have time to figure out why something went wrong. There's enough of that just with apps to figure out.
No, I don't recommend anyone run betas of any kind. It'll be nice one day. I won't have to run betas anymore. But for now, as long as I'm doing this book, I am running betas every summer. So
we appreciate you taking the arrows for us, Josh. Hey, thanks so much for the time, and congratulations on yet another Take Control book.
Hey, thanks for having me back on. Thanks.
We'll do it again.
All right.
Folks, this is MacVoices. I'm Chuck Joyner. Again, be a little cautious about your upgrades as far as actually doing them day one, but also definitely pick up Josh's book to guide you through your iPad and iOS upgrades. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.